Chapter 24 of The King's Daughter. The King's Daughter by Pansy. Chapter 24. The Strange Wedding. Great and marvellous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. The October day was aglow with beauty, all the leaves of the trees had adorned themselves with spots of scarlet and crimson and gold, and the leaf-strewn earth rustled gaily as you trailed your garments along the walk. Over all, the magnificent sun poured his yellow glory. It was just that time of high carnival that the world takes on before it spreads its grey and naked frost-bitten arms abroad, proclaiming that winter is at hand. Dell had been out into all the beauty, drinking it in, and gathering great glowing bunches of leaves. She had come in again, and dropped herself on a low ottoman, letting the leaves shower around her, while she set herself about arranging them into many-colored bouquets. The side door stood open, letting in the breezy freshness of the afternoon. An open fire burned in the grate to dry and sweeten the October air. Dell was in her favorite dress of snowy white. It was late in the season for white dresses, and Lewiston people thought her very absurd. But Dell, who had ever been hopelessly indifferent as to what people thought about her garments, said that black dresses and winter would come soon enough, so every bright afternoon she robed herself in white, and compromised with the season by adding a dainty scarlet sack, that matched the leaves in her hair and in the vases all about her. Very happy and bright looked Dell on this particular afternoon, a sweet and settled peace shining in her eyes. Not a day older seemed she than on that first afternoon in August, more than 2 years ago. The room in which she sat accorded well with her appearance. Bright and fresh and beautiful was everything about her; simple, of course, to be in keeping with the low ceiling and the old-fashioned doors and windows, but fairly alive with comfort and an exquisite taste. There was only one large piece of furniture in the room, and that a chair, elegantly upholstered, looking soft and downy enough for a bed in itself, and in this chair, his gaily slippered feet resting on the cushioned footstool, his crimson-lined wrapper folded comfortably about him, rested Dell's father. On his face change was distinctly marked. Indeed, you would hardly have imagined that that smoothly shaven, neatly, even elegantly dressed old man could be the miserable, red-faced, half-drunken wretch who sat with his slouched hat pushed to one side, and his feet tilted above his head on that memorable evening of the fire. "Father," Dell said suddenly, holding up a bunch of the brightest leaves, "did you ever in your life see anything prettier than that?" "Yes," he said slowly, in a fond, happy voice, looking beyond the leaves to the bright face back of them. "They're wonderful pretty, but I've seen something a great deal prettier, I know where." Dell laughed, a happy little laugh. The flattery, broad and absurd as it was very sweet to her hungry heart. And this man was her father. He watched her in pleased silence for a few minutes, then he said, "You may bring me the book if you will, child, and I'll read a bit." And Dell brought forward a light stand, so made that it would slip inside of the wheeled chair, and thereon she placed the handsomely bound, large print Bible, herself adjusting the glasses that the poor shriveled hands had not strength to arrange, and then went back to her work. She had, meantime, procured a large book for herself, and now gave her attention to the selection of the prettiest leaves for pressing, stealing occasional loving glances at the old man bending over the book. Great and marvelous indeed had been the changes wrought in that past year. His ways are wonderful indeed. Through much suffering and many disappointments, after dark days of hope deferred, the expected end had come, and Dell beheld her father reading with reverent face, and eyes full of earnest interest, the Bible stories so new and precious to him. Life was very bright to Dell during those days. With the constant care and the constant prayer that she had bestowed on her father, there had come into her heart a great and overpowering love, stronger than any filial love that she had ever imagined, and during those later months with the love had come a feeling of reverence, almost of awe, as she felt the babe in Christ springing into higher knowledge and stronger faith than she had attained. As she looked at him, she realized that every gray hair in that bent head was dearer to her than her own life. Looking at him and thinking of the changes, she went back a little over her own past, her efforts in the cause, her hopes and plans and disappointments and victories. "No," said Dell, with a puzzled face, after a moment's earnest thought, "I have tried to work hard and accomplish a great many things, but I believe I have done none of them. Well, what difference does it make? Many of the very things I wanted have been done, and if the King has accepted my trying and done the work himself, what is it to me so long as the work is done?" There were some things not yet done. There was Mr. Tresevant. Dell thought of him, but without a shade on her face. He would come into the light yet, she felt certain of it. The cloud still rested between them. He had never forgiven her for the slight that he still chose to think she had brought upon him at the time of Chester Elliott's funeral. She had never seen him alone for a moment since that time, and during his very rare calls on her father he had been only coldly polite to her. But Dell was forever looking forward to the day when he would understand everything in its true light. She did not know how it was to be brought about. Perhaps some chance word of his would give her an opportunity to explain. Some way, she could not tell how, it would all come right. Meantime, she had lost all her hard, bitter feelings toward him. She had even come to the point of justifying his cruel suspicion of her, and spent much of her time in a sort of gleeful looking forward to the days wherein they, having come fully to understand each other, would talk over together these dark days of separation. About the main point that had separated them she had not a doubt. The temperance question was taking on new force and power. With every passing day, new men, strong ones, were coming to the front to aid in the warfare. Mr. Tresevant was too good a man to remain long in the shadow. Once convinced that he had done her injustice, he would be the first to frankly admit it. Then, loving her entirely and heartily even as she did him, he would be led to look into the matter with all his heart, and looking at it thus from a Christian standpoint would not fail to be convinced, and once convinced nothing would keep him from standing up firmly for the right. Thus reasoned Dell, and watched with every passing day for the time to come. She was always saying to herself, perhaps this is the very day that is to set things right. She said it on this particular afternoon. Perhaps he will be in to see father, and then who knows what may happen? Some day I will frankly say to him, "You did me a great injustice that time. Don't you know you did?" And then I shall explain it all to him. I am not sure but that would be the right true way to do. I would have done it long ago if he had given me a chance. But it was a good while ago, more than a year now. But he will not be in this afternoon, I remember now. He is in Boston, stopping with the Burtons. I wonder why they went to their town house so early this year. Poor Laura! And then Dell drew a little sigh, as she could not help doing when she thought of that fair young widow, and how the brightness of her brief married life went out in such awful gloom. Something about Laura made her think of Mr. Nelson, but she did not like to think of him during these days. A very sad thing had come to pass. It was nearly 3 weeks since he had called on her. It was after her father was made comfortable and at rest for the night. She had been so glad to see Mr. Nelson in their cozy parlor. She admired and liked him so much. She had shown her pleasure so frankly and joyously, but he had overwhelmed her. In all their free glad meetings together it had never occurred to her that he was looking forward to her hopefully as his wife. When he told her so, in his frank, hopeful way, it smote her heart with a great grief. In her carelessness she felt that she had led him astray. She made all the reparation in her power. She told him gently and humbly of her preoccupied heart, of a certain trouble that came between them darkening her future, but of her hope and belief that it would be cleared away. In short, she made him her confidant, as she realized now that she ought to have done long before. Her confidant, except that she spoke no name, and gave no definite account of the trouble. But after a painful silence he had suddenly said, "Is it Mr. " then as suddenly stopped, and blushed to his very temples, and added, hastily, "I beg your pardon, I have no right. I thank you, Dell, for your confidence. Some other time I can talk with you. Good night." And he suddenly vanished. That was 3 weeks ago, and she had not seen him since. It seemed very hard that there must be just so many dark lives in this world. Just then occurred a break in her reverie. Tommy Truman called with the mail, the daily papers that Uncle Edward always sent. Tommy was in haste. No time for a chat, so Dell, her father being still absorbed in his reading, unfolded the crisp sheet and glanced down the column of daily news, skimming one item after another until suddenly her eyes were riveted. Twice she read over the familiar words. In Boston, October 23, at the residence of the bride's parents, by Rev. J. C. Holbrook, D.D., assisted by Rev. Chester Tremaine, D.D., Rev. Carroll C. Tresevant, of Lewiston, to Mrs. Laura Elliott, only daughter of Robert Burton, of this city. The paper lay very still in Dell's lap. She folded her hands above it, and sat looking steadily into vacancy. Sat for she did not know how long. But when she roused again the sunlight had disappeared. Thick leaden-colored clouds were over the sky. Some of her leaves had dropped near the grate, and the fire had withered them. They rustled and broke underneath her feet, as she arose and trod on them. She took her little hearth broom and swept them all into the grate. They blazed up for a moment, and then smoldered and shriveled and died out. Dell shivered, the room was cold. She closed the door and added more coal to the grate. "Dell, my child," said her father, looking up from the book, "do you remember the night that I got you to come into that room over there, and sing for us wretches, and you sang a hymn?" "Yes, father, very well indeed." "Well, do you know, child, I really believe that was when your old father began to think. You thought I was most asleep, but I wasn't, and you thought I went on from bad to worse after that, and maybe I did. But, for all that, you put words into my head that night that I never got rid of, day or night afterward, drink as hard as I could, and the Lord used them very words to bring me to myself at last." Dell came over without speaking a word, and wound her arms round her father's neck, and laid her soft brown head against his gray one. He would never know what balmy words he had been speaking, nor how her sore heart needed them. "Look here, child," he said, leaning forward again to the book, "I've found a verse for you and me. I'll read it, and you see if it ain't exactly so. I never came to that verse before." And in slow, tremulous tones he read: "And I will bring the blind by a way they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and not forsake them." Dell drew a quick breath. "Yes, father," she said, "it is for us." She had come to this verse before, but it had never so come to her. As she drew the shades and lighted the lamp, and went about her father's tea and toast, she whispered it over and over: "I will make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and not forsake them." In a subsequent volume our readers will hear more of Dell. The End. End of Chapter 24. End of The King's Daughter by Pansy. Recording by Trisha G.